Hello. Um, Here we are again. Um, really not been that long either. Got this one done really quick. Partly because it was great. What the fuck's going on there? Um, yeah, I thought, yeah. So, here we go. Jojo's Part 5. Um, Vento Aureo, or Golden Wind. But that must be Italian for Golden Wind because it's set in Italy. Um, Overall thoughts. I didn't think it was quite as good as um, Part 4, but I still really enjoyed it. I think it really kept a lot of that identity that Part 4 had in terms of how the fights felt and how it looks and how it sort of is all. I don't know how to describe it. It's all quite contained within quite a small space. Um, Not physically in this case, we're not in a single town, but in terms of there aren't there aren't lots of different elements um, flying around. They're not going all over the world. We get to spend a lot of time in some places. Um, and yeah, so I was pretty happy with that. There is a lot more traveling, but it feels less like a sort of this sort of grand tour that Part 3 was, and more of just I don't know, just going around Italy. um, and it helps that the stakes in this case are until the very end considerably lower. It's just a mafia story where they have to find the boss of this mafia and beat him. Basically, with a bunch of other stuff happening along the way. Um, and it's in Italy, and Italy's obviously great. I don't think that needs much saying. I think Italy's just a really lovely setting. It's obvious that um, I forgot his name. The mangaka is clearly a big fan of Italy. This is the only time that Jojo's has been set in Italy. Um, and generally, I missed a pretty massive point on here, really, which I need to change. Um, as I was just looking that over. Um, but yeah, Italy's a great setting. I think so anyway. Um, it's really nice to look at. It fits with how flamboyant JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is as well. Um, you know, it has I guess Italian feel. It's a I don't know how else to describe it. Italy is a great setting, and I enjoyed how just went around it. Nowhere near as much as sort of you might expect. It wasn't super detailed. Didn't go to everywhere in Italy, which I was originally thinking they might end up doing just because of um, the opening. I think up until the train fight here, this section of the story, I certainly was thinking it was going to be going to as many places as possible in Italy, but it doesn't end up being that. They spend quite a long time in places, um, and also a lot of the fighting takes place mid-travel, rather than like in a specific town, which I thought was a good decision. So while it feels a little bit like it's more similar to 3 in terms of raw, like they're traveling around all the time, basically what I'm trying to say is it's actually more similar to 4 in that it's sort of quite a self-contained, low stakes until the end story. Um, which is reliant on this sort of core team, which unlike 3, which the more I think about, that core team is I'm going to word this terribly because I'm not good at talking about this sort of thing, but it feels very much like in part 3, the sort of team we're following is very like ultra masculine. This sort of typical, I don't know, masculine hero idea that all of the characters feel that, and it's just like this big thing. Whereas in part 4 and part 5, it feels a lot more. Well, it just feels a lot less sort of hyper masculine, which is, I think, much more preferable. That's the realization I had reading this part, um, because you know this isn't the most masculine of themes, I would say. Um, Speaking of, so we've got Giorno, Jojo number 5. This time Jojo being Gio, but still, who is technically related, but definitely it's a bit of a stretch because he's technically Dio's son, but obviously that involves Jonathan's body, so he is still sort of a Joestar, and that's how he has a stand. But he looks like Dio. He's blonde. He has an amazing design. He's probably the best designed character yet. Full stop. He just looks awesome. Um, his stand is great. It can create life. That's a really interesting idea. It's incredibly creatively used. It's not as overpowered as you might think. It does require some level of cunning to actually utilize it effectively against a lot of these enemies. And it helps that Giorno is unbelievably driven. His goal really is just to take over the mafia. He's not actually a good guy, which I guess you could see as an issue because that's definitely the opposite of the case with every other part so far in JoJo's. There's not much moral ambiguity. The protagonist, the JoJo we're following, is clearly a really good person every time. And that's not really true here. It's a bit grayer. Obviously, better than the current boss, who is a bad person. But Giorno, I mean, we literally see at the end, he basically becomes the godfather. There are like people kissing his hand and stuff. Um, it's an interesting arc. It's very different to the rest of the parts. I didn't mind it. Because it makes more sense. Because he's part Dio. You know, it fits in with this theme of sort of following in line with the goals and morals of your ancestry, which applies to all the previous JoJos, right? And he is sort of a mix in that he is fundamentally quite a good person, but he also wants power in the same way that Dio does. And that's a really good blend. I thought that was a really interesting thing to follow at the core of the story. And then we have Bruno, who absolutely blows me away as a character. He shows up. Originally, he's a bit of an antagonist. Him and Jono have a fight, and then he agrees to help Jono out because he's already a part of the mafia, and Jono's not in the mafia yet. So he basically sneaks him in to being a mafia member. And I know they're not. There's literally 0 point in the story where they're called the mafia, but it's Italian gangsters, so I'm going to call them the mafia. It just makes more sense to me. But Bruno, he's great. He's a lot more of a a typical Joestar character. He's a lot more like Josuke. He's a bit more like nonchalant in that sort of Jojo style, but he's much more explicitly empathetic in the same way that Josuke is. Um, and it helps that he has a really excellent stand, which basically can create zips on surfaces which he can open and close. And he can go, through the zip, or he can just use it to split something else in half for whatever purpose. Um, it's very fun to watch. I'd say it is the best stand anyone in the sort of main team of any part of JoJo's has had. It is incredibly enjoyable to watch in combat. It's just great. But it does help that we also have Mister, who's also excellent from a stand standpoint and from a character standpoint. From a character standpoint, he feels that like super loyal position. He's unbelievably loyal to Bruno. And he's very sort of single focused, driven, kind of ruthless individual who's just going to follow like the path he's already set on. He's not really a sort of malleable character. The other characters can't really change what he's going to do, which I think works well. And his stand is great. It's these six little guys who basically ride on the bullets in his gun and then do a bunch of other stuff with the bullets and just fly around. And they're very helpful and they're very independent. They're all basically their own little characters. They all have the same personality. They're very much interchangeable. It's not like there's six different characters. But that's really fun to watch. Then we've also got Narantia, another impeccable character, I think. Probably my favourite from sort of a most endearing standpoint, not necessarily best written, which I think I would give to Bruno. But definitely the most endearing, very sort of childlike, due to a very unfortunate upbringing, limited education and such, and also incredibly loyal to Bruno. I think that's really worth stating that these four are just ridiculously loyal, which is excellent at selling how awesome Bruno is. Just amazing. Anyway, Narantia. His stand is a plane, and he can track people's breaths on this little radar thing that he can pull up as well, which is really just, it's good. There's nothing else to say there. Other things as a character, I feel as though he maybe doesn't go through a specific arc, which is a shame. I would have liked to see more of an arc from Narantia. I feel like Mister does go through more of an arc, in that he sort of learns. How do I put this? I'm really struggling to put anything into words right now. I apologize. I think he does become more willing to like listen to alternatives and change his mind really towards the end. At the beginning, he's very much stuck. You can see this in the first time he fights, in the way he's thinking. But by the end, he's very much trying to think outside the box and such, I guess. But yeah, he goes through a bit of an arc. I'm struggling to describe it, but there's a clear like arc for Mister, and obviously Jono and Bruno do as well, because they are really the main two characters. But I feel Narantia maybe doesn't go through as much of an arc, and the same is true of Fugo as well, actually. But I'll get into why that is and why I have a bit of an issue with Fugo later, because I've literally got that down here. Um, Speaking of Fugo, I guess I'll cover him now. He is easily the most forgettable part of the main group. Um, I don't hate him or anything. He's completely fine. He has an interesting stand that is only used a single time, which is also really, really strange. But I'll grant, I don't know how many other interesting ideas you can do with this stand. It's just got, it can just release like a virus, and the virus can be used for things. um, um, it gets the one-time use, and it's really good in that one case. I just think there would have been a bit of a difficulty to find another different way of utilizing it, which I think is reasonable to see. But he literally only gets a single fight, which is a shame because everyone else gets more than two. Um, so yeah. And then finally we have Abaccio, who's sort of like the least friendly with Giorno in particular. I mean, he literally pisses in like Giorno's tea or whatever when they meet each other. Which was just a really unusual situation. Um, he's very much sort of private, um, and a bit more reserved, and generally more confrontational with Giorno, who generally is very smart. That's the one thing about Giorno I sort of have a lot of respect for, and is very similar to Jojo, but also similar to Dio in that he's incredibly calculating. When the new stand user shows up, the most important thing, he sort of just sits. He doesn't act until he's confident he understands the stand. Um, which I thought was really just good to see. It's not like every character needs to be doing that, of course, because that wouldn't fit with some of these characters' personalities, but it's still incredibly nice to watch someone really think everything through before they act. Especially when you have people like Mister and Narantia, um, who take a lot longer to figure things out, and also are normally fighting while figuring things out. But anyway, back to Abaccio. He's very critical of Giorno. Um, and also, I would say, in general, more critical of everything than anyone else in the group. And he's also sort of older, so it's almost like the sort of condescending. I think him and Bruno are the same age and are the oldest. Um, the sort of condescending uncle, I guess, to Bruno being the father of this group. But I think that fits in really well. You've got to have somebody like that to really function, because sometimes if everyone's just agreeing on everything, you're going to end up all agreeing on the wrong thing. So he's there to sort of pull that back and make sure that doesn't happen, which is good. It's a very functional group of uh, mafia members um, that we're looking at here. And his stand is interesting in that it can rewind time for objects, so you can observe what was happening to them in the past, which isn't particularly, or it isn't really at all, combat oriented, but it's still pretty interesting. Um, and yeah, that's our main group. They're pretty good. It's in Italy. That's pretty good. Let's get on with the fucking plot. Um, so first character we see is Koichi, which I did make. I want to just say, my prediction that he would be back was correct, but I was expecting it to be in Part 6 when he was an adult. It is not. It is in Part 5, and he is the same age. But he is going to sort of observe Giorno on Jojo's behalf, and the only time we see Jojo is over the phone, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting we would see more of him. And there's no Josuke either, which I wasn't really expecting. Anyway, Koichi has like a little fight with Giorno, then Giorno fights Bruno, then Bruno agrees to let him be a part of the gang, and then we're introduced to Polpo, who has an arrow. Importantly, there are two arrows in this story, one of which belongs to Polpo. And he's been making all these stand users in Italy to work for the mafia, which are who all the enemies are. Because a big group of them have left the Mafia to be traitors to the Mafia and sort of fight them, and then later our main group will be the ones fighting the Mafia. Ooh. Polpo is interesting because he sort of shows the power that these gangsters hold in Italy. He can just exist in prison and can have anything he wants while he's in prison. He's got guns in his cell. He's got a fridge in his cell. And he's like a huge, huge guy. Obviously, he's living a life of luxury within prison. It really shows how deep the mafia runs within the Italian system, which is excellent. And additionally, he has an interesting stand, which is inside this lighter, and if the lighter is lit, it will come out and kill whoever sees it being lit. Unless the one lighting it is Popo himself. And once it's out of the light, it can't leave the shadows because it's sort of light generated. It can't leave shadows. And Giorno and Koichi work together to sort of work around it. And then it's sort of his challenge to keep the lighter for like 24 hours, I think, by Polpo. Goes back and gives it to him, and then he's in the Mafia. We meet the rest of the group. Polpo is killed by Giorno, because Giorno turns Polpo's banana into a gun and then makes him shoot himself with the banana gun, which I thought was quite funny, I guess. But also very sort of Dio-esque in terms of execution style. That was probably one of the two moments that really reminded me of Dio the most with Giorno. The other one being the actual ending where he's like very menacingly being the leader of the Mafia. But yeah, after Polpo dies, the gang wants to go get his treasure from Capri, and they want that because if they get the treasure, then Bruno can give the treasure to the big boss of the Mafia and will be promoted because of that. Which gets them one step closer to taking over the Mafia, which is Giorno's goal. However, they're not the only people who know about the treasure, so they're tracked by these two other stand users. First one can flatten, like, he can, like, deflate things so they become completely flat. Which is, it's interesting, but I think, unfortunately, the actual encounter, almost everyone is taken out and flattened immediately. And I understand why. It's so we can meet each stand one at a time. This case, it's to show off Abbacchio's rewinding time stand so he can work out where they've gone because they disappeared because they were flattened and then put, like, in between the layers of the boat that they're on. But unfortunately, it just doesn't sell me. There's too much time spent in suspense where we don't understand the power, and then after the power itself is revealed, the rest of the fight takes about a minute. Which is not necessarily the type of stand I'm interested in seeing. Although I do enjoy a bit of a mystery around what the stand can do, I think more time should be spent knowing what it can do than not during the actual combat scenario. And that was a bit of an issue I had with this first user. The second one is 1v1ing Mister, so we can learn Mister's power. His stand is just the ability to lock objects in place, which is interesting, but unfortunately overshadowed by basically every other stand in this part, because the stands, if the enemy stands in this part, are absolutely at their peak once again. Okay, I can't remember his name again, but I think it's Araki. I'm gonna say Araki. If it's not, kill me. But his creativity when it comes to stands has not stopped increasing yet, and it is so good here. It's absolutely amazing. Yeah. After this, they get the treasure. Then they are introduced to the boss's daughter Trish, who they have to escort to the boss in Venice while being hunted down by these like mafia traders who want to kill her. Of which I think there are seven of them. Is what they say, and we do meet all of them over the course of this sort of midsection of the story. Um, the first of which is for Maggio, who fights Narantia and is there to introduce Narantia's plane stand. His ability is to shrink himself and also other people if he can cut them. This is pretty, again, it's the same as the locking things in place. It's kind of overshadowed by everything else in the story, so I don't actually have that much to say about it. Though I will say one thing this fight does show is how um, little Narantia thinks of consequences, because he ends up blowing up the like town they're in pretty much by blowing up like every car in order to sort of smoke out the shrunk down Formaggio. Um, which sort of sucks a little bit, I think. But whatever. Um, then they go to Pompeii to pick up this key, um, and they meet a Illuso. Is his name Illuso? I think his name is Illuso. Who has it's a mirror-based stand. We've had similar stuff, but in this case, he drags other people into the mirror. But their stands can't be summoned in the mirror; they're summoned in the real world, which requires a lot of problem solving because you basically have to force him to jump in and out of the mirror in the way. And this is to introduce Fugo stand. So basically, the key is to get him to come out of the mirror so he can catch the virus. Basically, that's what they're trying to get to happen, which is quite difficult to do. Um, it takes a really long time. I will say this fight maybe lasted too long, but it was very interesting the entire time. It was very almost. It's very strategic. There were very few actual sort of actions taking place. It was very much plan oriented, but I was very much in suspense the entire time. It was really enjoyable to watch. So I'd say that was actually a really well done fight, but it doesn't really compare to the the very next one, which was the train fight, which I think might be my favorite part of this part, and possibly my favorite of the series. Um, Not just favorite fight, but just favorite moment. So I'm gonna focus in on this a bit. So let me, paint a bit of a picture. They're getting on a train to Rome. They found a turtle that they can all hide inside, so they just need to get the turtle on the train, and then they can just hope nobody finds the turtle. Um, Also on the train, we got two stand users at the same time, which is always fun. I think it's always great when there are multiple people on both sides involved in the fight. In this case, Bruno and Mister versus Pesci and Prosciutto. Incredible name. And I haven't even got into the stand names, which are all music references, which were all just amazing. Um, I completely forgot about that, but yeah, almost every stand name I think is named after some sort of classic album. It's amazing. It's great. Big fan of it. Or some cases album, some cases artist. But all great. Loved it. Um, I can't remember any of the older ones, unfortunately. But um, we're getting there. White Album is right there. Um, Pesci has a stand which is a fishing rod that can go through walls, and he can use it to find out information about what he's hooked, including people, which is useful in general. And Prosciutto has the ability to produce a sort of disease from his stand, which can make people old. And if you cool the person down, then they become back to their regular age. This is what limits the number of people involved in the fight, because there isn't enough ice to give to everyone else. So it's just Mister and Bruno who have aging prevention on them. So like Giorno and Fugo and Abaccio and Arancia can't fight. Um, Most of the fight is between Mister is taken out very quickly, and most of the fight is between Prosciutto and Bruno, and then Pesci sort of gets involved again at the end. He's mostly spent fucking around with the turtle. Um, I don't want to go in. I'm not very good at describing this sort of thing anyway, and I don't want to just go into all the different sort of moves and stuff that each of them do. But the actual fighting between Bruno and Prosciutto was amazing. It helps that Bruno's stand is just on its own level, and probably the best stand yet. Um, Prosciutto's is also pretty good, and he's very creative with how he does it. Because obviously his long-term goal is to continue to age Bruno, by getting in direct contact with him, which he can also use to age people even more rapidly than the sort of gas that's being emitted from his stand, and in a way overpower the ice that he's holding, which is using to slow his aging, at least. Um, and I mean, yeah, it's just the best fight that has been in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure so far, for sure. And I was a big fan of it. Um, Next to talk about considerably worse. While I did actually quite enjoy the power of the babyface stand, being able to sort of turn objects into little cubes and then turn them into like furniture and stuff. The stuff surrounding it with the like weird breeding thing that happened was just, I felt a bit unnecessary and kind of weirded me out, and I wasn't a big fan of it. And the actual owner of the stand was just very strange and a bit kind of, I don't know, yucky. It didn't make me feel good. Um, in a way that I didn't really anticipate or want to experience while reading JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Right? Like, it's not like I'm completely opposed to something like that happening in a story, but this is not the story where I think that sort of thing should be happening, and I wasn't a big fan of it. Um, and it doesn't help that the only person involved in this fight is Giorno, in a way that's really stupid. Like, everyone else can see the fight happening and doesn't notice, and it just sort of, that didn't make me particularly happy either, I'm afraid to say. And then there's a White Album, which is sort of like a general cold powers that you get quite often. It's obviously a very cool power. It's not necessarily as original as some of the other stands, but it's still very cool. It's a good fight. This one involves a lot of Mister. A lot of these fights involve Mister, now that I think about it. He is involved a lot. Giorno's also involved in this one. It's pretty great, but I kind of, it sort of felt like there was very little stakes in this one, to be honest. It felt really obvious who was going to win. Obviously, you know who's going to win almost every time, but it really felt especially clear who was going to win in this case. But there were some really creative ideas. I enjoyed Jono growing grass, and then because it's so cold, the grass is frozen, and then Mister uses that as like a sled. That was really cool. And I think it really shows that Giorno level-headedness coming up, because he's sensible enough to know that following Mr. White Album, I can't remember the real guy's name, into the water is a obviously bad idea, but Mr. just jumps straight in. I think that shows the difference in their characters in a really effective way. And I also appreciate that they're the two fighting with each other in this case, among several others, because I guess because they're the only two who end up surviving and being a part of the mafia at the end of the story. Um, so in that way, I appreciate that they had a lot of opportunities to grow the sort of bond between them through combat. And it helps, obviously, that Mister being in a fight introduces a third character in the form of his stand, whereas most other stands aren't really a character in of themselves, they're just sort of a facet for combat. Um, and that's great. And then they get to Venice, and the boss, it turns out, he was bringing his daughter all the way there so he could kill her himself, because that way there would be no more connections to his identity. So Bruno decides to try and save her, um, and we are introduced to the boss's stand, King Crimson, which can see into the future and can erase time. This isn't the pause time that Jotaro can do. He can't exist in the gap. He just removes sort of time. I don't really know how else to describe it. And also, I don't really know how, if that makes sense. To me, it doesn't entirely make sense. But still, that's what he has the ability to do. I'm not opposed to it. It's very obviously powerful. And he's a very serious threat. And in that regard, it works. But it's not my favourite stand. And in general, I didn't think the boss was as interesting of an antagonist as Kira. Um, which was unfortunate. Partly because he's such a sort of mysterious character, we still don't even know what he looks like, and we're halfway through the story. Even at this point, we knew who Kira was, and we'd seen him do plenty of things in part 4. But still, the boss gets mad. He's gonna try and kill Bruno and Giorno, who tries to help Bruno out. Everyone except for Fugo agrees to help out Bruno. Fugo doesn't, and this is one of the things that really weirded me out, is that Fugo stays on the sort of in Venice, and we just never see him again. We don't even see him at the end of the story. He's just gone. It's not like the setup I was expecting, which is that he would later have to fight them, because he decided to side with the boss over Bruno. He would have to end up fighting Bruno, and that would be a very interesting conflict. It doesn't happen. He just doesn't show up. I understand that they wanted him out of the story because his stand was kind of pointless, and also the group was sort of very large and he wasn't getting much time anyway. So it does make sense to get rid of him, but I feel like there was a lot of wasted potential with what they could have done with him after getting rid of him. Um, and so it feels like a bit of a loose end, and I wasn't particularly happy with it. Yeah. Before they leave Venice, they also have to do another of my favorites, but for very different reasons. This is the closest we get to a comedic fight in this part, which I actually just really realized. There isn't that much. There aren't that many sort of comedic fights. It's all very much the serious, high-stakes fights where people could theoretically die. There's nobody who's embarrassingly bad and basically just stumbling over themselves while they fight, which isn't true of part 4 or 3, and I think that's actually a shame now that I think about it. It sort of explains one of the sort of things I was feeling with this, is that it just didn't feel like it was maybe diverse enough some of the time, and I think that's the reason why. There just wasn't enough sort of comedic fighting. But anyway, this one is pretty close because it involves Narantia, and everything he says is the opposite because of one of the stands, which is grabbing onto his tongue and controlling what he says. And the other one is a shark that can teleport into different bodies of water, and its size is reflective of the size of the body of water it teleports to. So obviously what it wants to create is quite a big body of water so they can jump out and bite people. And the way it sort of tries to set that up by having the other stand manipulate Narantia is very entertaining, also very threatening, and it's just a really enjoyable thing to watch happen. It's incredibly frustrating because you know what you want to happen is for people to work out what's going on and work out there's something attached to his tongue, but they just think he's being like an idiot, which, kind of sucks. Um, in the end, they beat it, and then they get on a plane, and this is where we get another intriguing stand, which is Notorious B.I.G. Incredible. This one, is like a stand that really breaks formula. In that it only comes out when the host dies, and then once it's out, it literally cannot be stopped. This is the only stand they aren't actually able to defeat. They just get rid of it because it's attracted to whatever is moving the fastest, and they just dump it in the sea, and it's just fighting the waves basically. And in this fight, we also see Trish's stand unlocked, which has the ability to soften material, and that's basically the only other time it's used in the story, which is another thing I think was an issue after Trish gets her stand. She doesn't do enough fighting. There's still like an over focus on Mister in particular, which I feel maybe could be balanced out. You could probably put her in more of the combat situations. I understand that they're trying to protect her because the boss is primarily trying to kill her, but still. She could have taken matters into her own hands, and in general, I think Trish could have been more of a character than she was. She felt like she was more just like a piece in the game between Diavolo and Bruno, and she didn't feel like her own person a lot of the time. Even though she survives at the end of the story, she's not even in the final panel showing what Giorno is up to, which I thought was a shame as well. And I think she could have been a bit more of a character. That's an issue I generally have with that. Um, but anyway, and then we're introduced to Doppio, who is the alter ego of the boss, who has split personality. One hand he has Doppio, who is the boss's most loyal henchman, and then the other personality is the boss himself, which is very interesting and incredibly creative, and I was a big fan of it. Um, in particular, there is actually a comedic thing that happens. It's not necessarily based in combat, which is the issue I had really. There's no like funny combat, I guess. Um, but he keeps getting calls from his boss, which is obviously him. So he just picks up random objects and answers them like it's a phone. And I thought that was pretty funny, like when he's using a frog and then also a cigarette, as if it's a phone, was just very entertaining. Anyway, Doppio is trying to stop them from finding out about his origins in Sardinia, which is where they took the plane to, which we learn about in a flashback. Basically, he was a bad person. There's a flashback for basically all of the main group and Diavolo, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember any of them, and they were largely forgettable. Like, they could have been utilized a bit better. The only thing I remember is like Narantia was eating out of a bin. I think maybe. That's it. But anyway, um, the boss slash Doppio fights the final of the sort of traitor gang I was talking about earlier, which is Risotto, who has basically his stand is all of the iron in his body, which he can then transfer out and like cause like razor blades and other metal objects to appear inside of people, which is really interesting. The fight between him and Doppio is great. It's really close. Either of them could die. Doppio barely survives. The way he wins is basically by tricking Narantia into killing Risotto. And in general, I think it's just absolutely excellent. It's another highlight of the story. And after this, Doppio manages to kill Abaccio, which was a really sad and well handled death. The issue. No, not it's not even an issue. The thing about this death is that Abaccio is. I mean, it's an issue for the people in the story. It's not an issue with the story. Abaccio's the only person who can do anything in Sicily because he can use the rewind time to see the boss as a child. So now he's gone. It's pointless for them to be there. They get a mysterious message saying, "Come to Rome, come to the Colosseum and meet me. I have a way of beating the boss's ridiculous power." So that's the next place they want to go. When they arrive in Rome, they meet the final two henchmen of the boss, Cioccolata. That's dead wrong, for sure. Pronounced that wrong. And Secco. Cioccolata is like the most obviously evil character in the entirety of JoJo's, including probably Dio, which is ridiculous. He's just like hates people and enjoys killing them. The way he kills them is by making them rot, but the disease that he's sort of spreading only triggers when you go down in elevation. Which is an interesting decision, but I was largely a fan of it. Secco, meanwhile, his stand is worn like a suit, and he can use it to swim through the ground. He has a great fight with Bruno, while Cioccolata is fighting Giorno and Mister. Um, the Secco fight in particular was very entertaining, and as a character, I thought Zeko was pretty interesting. Um, in terms of just his personality, there's not like he has like an interesting conflict or internal conflict or some sort of arc, but he's just got an interesting personality. It was sort of stood out. Um, and then we learn that the person who sent the message, we've got another character return that I never would have seen coming. I assumed he was long gone. But yeah, Polnareff is back. He has an arrow. He realizes that if you shoot a stand with the arrow, then the stand gets its own sort of stand, I guess. Or rather, it's the arrow stand that comes out, and that stand is like insanely powerful. So he shoots his own stand with the arrow, and around this time we also get the reveal that Bruno is already dead, but his corpse is like got life breathed into it by Giorno. We also see the boss's actual design, which is sick. He has like these awesome tattoos and stuff. It's great. And anyway, then the stand comes out, and then it swaps everyone's bodies. I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly who swapped with whom, but the most important thing is that because the boss has a split personality, they go to two separate bodies, and also one of the bodies has two personalities, one being one of the gang, I think it's Trish, and the other one being the boss, Diavolo, just sort of hiding inside. Narantia is also killed. I'm going to be honest, felt a little bit pointless of a death. It does up the stakes because anyone else could die. Ooh. But he dies so early into this sort of final fight section that it feels very unimpactful, and you almost forget about it by the end, which sucks. I think he should have just died later into the fight, alongside Bruno, who officially dies because his body is dead, so he can't return to it when the swap back happens after they beat the stand. Speaking of this fight, the arrow fight, I've dubbed it, I didn't 100% know what was going on. I didn't really necessarily 100% understand what the stand in the arrow was doing, and also how it was being beaten by Diavolo. I have like a grasp on it, but I don't really get it. It doesn't massively matter, but it was a bit frustrating that I couldn't really understand it. And I also think that the stakes are upped in this final section so much, because if Diavolo gets the arrow now, he could literally take over the world. They're like, oh, he's going to take over the world. And I really thought, we've just got Dio again now, and I wasn't a big fan of that. Sorry. So I generally wasn't a massive fan of what was going on at the end. I just think it was too over in itself. It reminded me more of part 3. I wanted more of part 4, I guess. That might be partly on me, but still. Then there's a final fight between Giorno and Diavolo, which happens, and Giorno wins, and then he becomes the head of the mafia. And then we get a big flashback to this stone, and I absolutely loved this. This was incredible moment. So we go back to before Giorno has even met Bruno, but it's on the day they're going to meet, and the original gang here are dealing with this stand user whose stand is a stone. The stone turns into a sculpture completely of its own. The user of the stand has no power over this stand. The person who's in that sculpture will die, and the stone is there to ensure that that happens in a way that is mentally painless for the user. They touch the stone, they realize it's inevitable that they're going to die, and then they let themselves die, basically. But thanks to the efforts of Mr. and Bruno, the stone never gets to touch him, which is why he went through what is realistically quite a horrible scenario of being in basically his own corpse, but possessed by his soul, rather than him being in his body, like the body itself is dead. It's a very horrible situation the more you actually think about it, that Bruno was dealing with for like a couple of days. And it explains that setup in this sort of like fighting fate type of thing, where he should have actually died before he even met Giorno. because he should have touched the stone, I guess. And I just thought that was really interesting of an idea more than anything else. I don't really know what to read from it necessarily, but I thought it was just really interesting. I guess as time passes, I'll think about it more because I only finished part 5 yesterday evening, and then I'll maybe have more of a hold on it, but we'll see. And that's the manga, and that's my thoughts on everything that happens in it. And I thought it was pretty good, and I think it's a 7 out of 10, but not as good as part 4, which is also a 7 out of 10, but it's like a higher 7 out of 10, you know? As for predictions for part 6, I'm gonna say that we're not done with Josuke and Jojo, and they're gonna be in part 6. That's basically the only prediction I'm gonna make. I'm also gonna say that we're never gonna see Giorno again. I think this was a completely standalone thing. I know that this is quite a divisive thing as well. I think a lot of people didn't like it as much as Part 4 when it came out, which I agree with and I think makes sense. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was an attempt to shy away from this section of the story a little bit in Part 6. So my suspicion is nobody in Part 5, who's only in Part 5 anyway, is going to come back. And I think we're going to see a return of Jotaro and maybe Josuke, as well as Jojo number 6. And maybe, people like Koichi and Oyakasu. I guess we'll see. That's all I really have to say. Pretty good, 7 out of 10. Yeah, excited for Part 6. Not sure how long that's going to take to do. Probably not very long, judging by how long it took to get to this video. Yeah, that's all I have to say, to be honest. Yeah, bye.